A powerful mafia boss finds a hungry boy at the gates of his mansion, and the child looks up at him and says, "Sorry, Dad, I'm late." And what he discovers next changes his life forever. Rain hammered against the windows of Thornton Manor like fists demanding entry. Jared Thornton sat alone in his office, the only lit room in the sprawling estate. At 37, he commanded one of the most feared criminal empires on the East Coast. Money, power, blood on his hands. He had everything the underworld valued, yet he lived alone in a mansion built for ghosts. A knock interrupted him. Faint, fragile, impossible, his hand moved to the gun beneath his jacket. The main gate had military-grade security, but the motion sensors had flagged a small heat signature. Seeing a lone child on the monitor, Jared had overridden the system himself, driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain. The knock came again. Jared opened the door, ready for a bullet or a blade. What he found was neither. A boy, maybe 5 years old, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, clutching a torn backpack like a lifeline. But his eyes were burning with a determination no child should possess. "Can I help you?" Jared's voice was ice. The boy swallowed hard. Then he spoke words that cracked the foundation of everything Jared knew. "You're Jared Thornton, right? I'm Aiden. You're my dad." The mafia boss, who feared nothing, felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. "I think you're mistaken." "Mom said you'd say that." The boy didn't flinch. "She said if anything happened to her, I should find you. She's gone, and she told me I had to run to you and never look back. She said you were the only one who could keep me safe, Dad." "Your mother's name?" "Meredith Ashford." The name meant nothing. Jared had never known anyone by that name, but there were 2 years of his life he couldn't remember at all. 2 years his family said contained nothing important. Looking at this boy with his own jawline, his own stubborn stance, his own unflinching stare, Jared realized something terrifying. His family had lied, and this child was the proof. If you want to know what secrets were buried in those lost years, smash that like button and share this story. Subscribe now so you won't miss the next chapter. Jared stood there for a few more seconds, watching the soaked little boy tremble under the hallway light. Every instinct of a mafia boss screamed that this was a trap, that he should shut the door and forget the whole thing. But something in those eyes held him in place, something so painfully familiar he couldn't put a name to it. "Come in," he said at last, his voice still cold, but less razor-sharp than before. Aiden stepped over the threshold, leaving a puddle on the marble floor. He didn't look around the lavish mansion the way other children would. He simply stood still, waiting, as if he were used to letting adults decide his fate. Jared led him up to the second floor, into one of the smaller sitting rooms. He opened a closet and realized he didn't have a single thing suitable for a 5-year-old. In the end, he pulled out a plain white t-shirt of his own. "Change. The bathroom's over there. Hot water. Warm up." Aiden took the shirt, looked at it, then looked at Jared. "Thank you, Dad." That word went through the armor Jared had built over so many years like a knife. He didn't answer. He only nodded and stepped out. 20 minutes later, Aiden appeared in the kitchen doorway. Jared's t-shirt hung down to the boy's knees, looking like an oversized nightshirt. His black hair was still damp, but combed neatly back. Jared stood at the stove, feeling out of place in his own kitchen. The most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast could order an enemy dealt with without blinking. Yet here he was, frozen in front of the refrigerator, because he didn't know what a 5-year-old was supposed to eat. In the end, he made a chicken sandwich and warmed a bowl of soup left over from dinner. Nothing elaborate, but at least it was hot. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the bar stool by the kitchen counter. Aiden climbed up, his small legs not reaching the footrest. He looked at the sandwich and the soup, his eyes brightening, but he didn't lunge. "May I eat?" Jared asked. "Yes, sir. Thank you, Dad." Aiden lifted the spoon and began to eat, not with the frantic hunger of a starving child, but slowly, politely, his back straight. Jared leaned against the counter and watched. The way the boy held the spoon, the way he chewed each bite carefully, the way he dabbed at his mouth with a napkin now and then. Someone had taught this child well, but what made Jared's skin prickle were the things no one could teach. The way Aiden tilted his head when he thought, exactly like Jared. The way he drew his brows together when he focused, the same down to the smallest detail. Even the way he sat upright with quiet control, though he was only 5, was something Jared saw every day in the mirror. "Did your mother teach you to eat like that?" he asked. Aiden looked up. "Yes. Mom said I have to always be polite, no matter where I am, no matter how hungry I am. What is your mother like? The boy went quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words. She's really good. She works a lot. Sometimes she works 2 or 3 jobs in a day. But she always reads to me before I go to sleep. Jared felt his chest tighten. A woman working 2 or 3 jobs a day to raise a child, while he sat here in a mansion worth millions, never even knowing this boy existed. Weren't you scared? He asked. Coming here alone? In a storm like this? Aiden set the spoon down and looked straight into Jared's eyes. That gaze wasn't a 5-year-old's. It was the look of someone who had seen too much, endured too much. Mom said you're the most dangerous man she's ever met. Jared didn't react. He only waited. But Mom also said you would protect me if I found you. She said you might be terrifying to the whole world, but you would never hurt me. It felt as if someone had driven a fist into Jared's chest. This woman, Meredith Ashford, knew who he was, knew how dangerous he could be, knew how black his world was, and yet she had taught her child to come to him as a last resort, as a final safe place. Why? After he finished eating, Aiden began to yawn. Exhaustion finally caught up with him after a long night of fighting through the storm. Jared took him back to the sitting room and laid him down on the bed. Aiden curled beneath the blanket, his eyes already drooping. Dad? What? Thank you for not sending me away. Then the boy fell asleep, breathing evenly, his face finally softening into something like an ordinary child. Jared stood there for a long time, watching him. Son. The word rang in his mind like a bell. He had never thought he would have a child. He had never wanted one. His world was too dark for a child. But if this boy truly was his, then someone had stolen 6 years from him. 6 years when he should have watched his son grow. He pulled out his phone and called Conrad. Boss, find everything on Meredith Ashford. Everything. From the moment she was born to now. Yes, boss. And Conrad, check the 2 years I don't remember. I want to know everything that happened in that window. Everyone I met. Everywhere I went. Silence on the other end. Conrad. Yes, I'm here, boss. Is there anything else? A pause too long. Jared had known Conrad long enough to recognize when he was hiding something. I want to know who erased that stretch from every record, who gave the order, and why. Conrad drew in a deep breath. When he answered, his voice was weighted with something Jared couldn't read. Yes, boss. I'll look into it. Jared ended the call and stared out the window. The storm was still howling outside, but in this room a 5-year-old boy slept in peace. A boy who might be his son. A boy someone had hidden from him for 6 years. And Jared Thornton would find the truth. And Jared swore to himself that he would protect them, no matter what throne he had to walk away from. Jared didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the wall across from him without truly seeing it. The boy's green eyes haunted him. Not his eyes. Someone else's. The eyes of a woman named Meredith Ashford. Early the next morning, the phone shattered the silence. Conrad. Boss, I've found her. Jared straightened in his chair. Where? A cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. She's been up all night looking for the boy, calling the police, calling hospitals, going everywhere. She's in a panic, boss. Jared was silent for a moment. A mother staying awake all night searching for her child in a storm, while her son slept peacefully in his mansion. Bring her here. Do you want me to? Invite her. Politely, but don't take no for an answer. Understood. 2 hours later, Jared stood in the great living room, looking out the window. Aiden was awake, sitting on the sofa reading a book Brenda had found in the library. The boy was still wearing Jared's oversized t-shirt, and he hadn't complained once. A car pulled into the driveway. A door slammed. Hurried footsteps crunched along the gravel path. Then the living room doors opened. She came in like a storm. Chestnut brown hair disheveled, eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. Her clothes were old, washed so many times the color had faded, but they were clean and neat. Her face was thin and pale, yet it couldn't hide the delicate beauty beneath. And her eyes, green as a forest after rain, exactly like Aiden's. Mom! Aiden jumped off the sofa and ran to her. Meredith dropped to her knees and gathered him into her arms. She held him so tightly it was as if she wanted to press him back into herself. Her hands trembled as she checked every finger, every arm, every strand of his hair. Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you? Did anyone do anything to you? Her voice broke. tears streaming down her face without sound, the silence of pain too great for sobbing. "I'm okay, Mom. I found Dad. Just like you said." Meredith went still. Slowly, she lifted her head, and for the first time her eyes met Jared's. It felt like a blow to his chest. Those eyes, he knew those eyes. Not the way you recognize a stranger on the street. He knew them the way you know the road home, the way you know your own breath. He had looked into those eyes before. Not once, hundreds of times, thousands. But where? When? Why couldn't he remember? A flash of memory sparked in his mind, faint and blurred. Candlelight, laughter, the scent of jasmine, and eyes looking at him as if he were the whole world. Then it was gone, leaving a sharp pain behind his temples. Meredith rose to her feet and pulled Aiden behind her. She looked at Jared, and in her gaze there was fear, but also hatred and pain, so much pain. "Thank you for keeping my son safe." Her voice was cold, rigid, as if she were building a wall between them. "We'll leave now." She took Aiden's hand and turned toward the door. Jared moved, not fast, not threatening, but decisive. He stepped in front of the exit, blocking her path. "You're not going anywhere. You don't have the right to keep me here. I have a child calling me Dad," Jared said, his voice low and dangerous. "I have the right to know the truth." "The truth?" Meredith laughed, and the sound was like shattering glass, sharp and painful. "You want the truth?" She stepped closer, facing him, though she only reached his shoulder. In that moment, she wasn't small. She was fire. She was a storm. She was 6 years of buried suffering rising to the surface. "The truth is, you chose to forget me, Jared. You chose them over us. You chose the Thornton family, your empire, your power and money. And me?" Her voice trembled, but it wasn't weak. "I was just a poor bartender's daughter who wasn't worthy of you." "That's what they said, and you believed them." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Meredith let out a bitter laugh. "You don't remember anything, do you? You don't remember Blue Velvet. You don't remember my tiny apartment. You don't remember the nights you said you wanted to leave it all behind to be with me." She paused, drawing in a shaky breath. "You don't remember the night you got down on one knee and slipped this ring onto my finger." Her hand rose to her chest, where a delicate chain lay hidden beneath her blouse, and Jared knew, though he couldn't see it, that a ring hung there. "I don't remember you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't remember anything you just said." Meredith looked at him, and in that moment the hatred in her eyes dissolved. All that remained was pain, pure, merciless, the pain of someone who had loved and been left behind, who had waited and never been chosen. "I know," she whispered, her voice on the verge of breaking. "That's the worst part." Silence settled over the room. Jared looked at the woman standing before him, the woman he didn't remember and yet somehow knew, in his bones, in every beat of his heart. He knew her, and he had lost her. But why? "Mom?" Aiden's voice rose, small between two adults. "Don't cry. Dad didn't send me away. Dad gave me a sandwich. Dad's nice." Meredith looked down at her son, then back at Jared. Something in her gaze shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope that the man she once loved was still somewhere inside this cold shell. "You're staying," Jared said. Not a question, a command. "Until I know what happened. Until I understand why 2 years of my life vanished without a trace. You're the missing piece, Meredith, and I won't let you walk away until I find the truth." Meredith looked at him, then at Aiden, then back at him again. "You want the truth?" she asked, her voice tired. "Fine, I'll tell you, but you may wish you'd never asked." Jared arranged for Meredith and Aiden to stay in a spacious guest room in the east wing of the mansion. She didn't protest, perhaps because she was too exhausted, perhaps because she needed answers to the questions that had haunted her for 6 years. Aiden fell asleep early, worn out after 2 days of upheaval. Meredith sat beside his bed, stroking his hair until his breathing turned slow and steady. Then she rose and stepped out onto the terrace where Jared was waiting. The sea roared in the distance, waves crashing against the cliffs like the heartbeat of some enormous beast. The wind carried the salt and the chill of the ocean. Jared leaned against the railing, a glass of whiskey in his hand, though he didn't drink. He only stared into the darkness, waiting. Meredith stood a few steps away, close enough to speak, far enough to keep a safe distance. 7 years ago, she began, her voice as soft as the sea breeze. "I was a bartender at the Blue Velvet Jazz Club. Do you know it? The place where the elite and the Mafia gather, where million-dollar deals are made in the dark, where people go to forget who they are." Jared didn't answer, but he turned to look at her. In the pale moonlight, her face was like a classical painting, beautiful and sad. "You were a regular. Every Friday night, at 9 o'clock sharp, you came in, always sat in the darkest corner, always drank Macallan, 25-year-old whiskey, always alone. You never spoke to anyone, never looked at anyone." She paused and drew in a deep breath. "Until one night, you looked at me, and you didn't stop." A flash of memory pierced Jared's mind. A dim bar, low lights, the sound of a piano, and eyes watching him over the rim of a glass. "You looked at me as if I were the only thing in that gray room that had color," Meredith continued, her voice distant, as if she were stepping back into the memory. "I knew who you were. I knew you were dangerous. I knew your world was one where people killed for power. But when you looked at me like that, I couldn't stop. We—" Jared tried to find the words, but his head throbbed as if split by a hammer. "We loved each other in secret. 6 months. You came to my small apartment whenever you could. You said it was the only place you felt like yourself. Not Thornton, the boss. Not Harrison's son. Just Jared." She turned toward the sea, as if she couldn't face him for what came next. "Then one night, you said you wanted to leave it all behind. Hand the organization to Grant. Start over. With me. Somewhere far away, where no one knew who we were." Her voice trembled. "You knelt in my tiny apartment, between the candles I lit because I'd forgotten to pay the electric bill, and you slipped this ring onto my finger." She touched her chest where the chain lay hidden beneath her blouse. "That was the happiest night of my life." Silence stretched between them. Jared felt fragments of memory stirring in his mind, blurred, shapeless, but real. "That night, you drove to meet your family. You said you were going to tell them about us, that you were leaving, that you were going to live the life you wanted." Meredith turned back to him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You never made it there." Jared felt as if ice water had been poured over him. "An accident. An accident." She nodded. "Your car went off a mountain road. You were in a coma for 3 weeks. I heard and I ran to the hospital. But they wouldn't let me in. Security said I wasn't on the list. Your family said you didn't want to see me." Her voice hardened with bitterness. "I waited outside the hospital gates every day, 2 weeks, until they chased me off like a stray dog. Meredith, I didn't give up. When you were discharged, I went to Thornton Manor. That's when I discovered I was pregnant." She placed a hand over her stomach by instinct, though now there was nothing there but memory. "I thought if you knew about the baby, you would remember. You would come back to me. What happened? Harrison Thornton met me himself." She spat the name like venom. "He handed me a check. $1 million, in exchange for my disappearance." She laughed, and the sound tore at the night. $1 million. That was my value in their eyes. $1 million to erase me and my child from your life. You didn't take it. Of course I didn't. I told him I would find a way to see you. I would tell you the truth. I would never give up." Meredith looked down at her hands. 3 days later, my apartment went up in flames at 2 o'clock in the morning. I woke up to smoke. The front door was locked from the outside. The window was the only way out. You jumped, from the 2nd floor, 4 months pregnant. I almost lost the baby." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "After that, I knew I couldn't stay. They wouldn't stop until my child and I were dead. So I ran. 6 years, 12 cities, never in one place longer than 6 months. Never using my real name, never leaving a trace." Jared stood as if turned to stone. Every word she spoke was a blade sliding into his chest. His family had done this. His father. Perhaps even his brother. They had driven away the woman he loved like she was a threat. Tried to kill her. Stolen 6 years he should have had as a father. "Why didn't you contact me later?" he asked, his voice rough. "When things had settled. When—" "I tried." Meredith cut in. "Once. When Aiden was 2 years old. I found your old number. I called, thinking maybe things were different. Maybe you had remembered. Maybe you were looking for me. And—" Meredith looked straight into his eyes, and in that gaze were 6 years of pain, 6 years of loneliness, 6 years of raising a child alone in fear. "You answered. I said my name. And you said you didn't know who I was." She paused, swallowing hard. "Then you hung up, like I was just a stranger who had dialed the wrong number." Jared felt his knees weaken. He didn't remember that call. He didn't remember any of it. 2 years of his life, including this woman, this love, this child, had been wiped clean, as if they had never existed. I don't remember that call." "I know," Meredith whispered, her voice on the verge of breaking. "I know you don't remember. Because they erased me from your memory, Jared. Not just the records, not just the evidence. They erased me from your own mind." She looked at him, and in the moonlight, tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "You forgot me. Completely. Thoroughly. As if I had never existed. And that," her voice caught, "is the most painful part of all. In the underworld, rumors spread faster than fire. Less than 2 days after Meredith appeared at Thornton Manor, the entire network was already whispering about the mysterious woman and the child inside the boss's estate. Those with eyes and ears everywhere reported to those who needed to know. And among the ones who needed to know, Harrison Thornton was always first. That afternoon, Jared was in his office reviewing the files Conrad had sent when he heard engines in the driveway. Not 1 car, 3. He didn't need to look out the window to know who was coming. Only one man dared arrive at Thornton Manor unannounced. The man who had built it. Jared rose and stepped into the hallway, just as the front doors opened. Harrison Thornton entered first, his posture still perfectly straight though he was nearly 70. Silver hair slicked back without a strand out of place. His expensive 3-piece suit immaculate. Behind him came Constance, Jared's mother, still coldly beautiful like an ice sculpture in her Chanel dress and pearls. And finally Grant, the eldest brother, tall but lacking Jared's presence, his face arranged in a mask of concern Jared knew too well. They stepped into the living room and stopped short. Aiden sat on the sofa, legs crossed, reading a book twice the size of his small hand. He looked up at the sound of footsteps, and Harrison Thornton seemed nailed to the floor. The boy was Jared's reflection cast in miniature. The nose, the jaw, the lines of his face, even the way he tilted his head at strangers with cool appraisal. That wasn't coincidence. That was blood. That was inheritance. That was undeniable proof. "Who are you?" Aiden asked, polite but unafraid. Before anyone could answer, Meredith appeared at the doorway. She had been coming down the stairs when she heard the cars, and now she stood there, facing the people who had turned her life into hell. Her face paled, but she didn't step back. Constance saw her, and her eyes darkened like a storm gathering. "That woman," she said, her voice glacial. "After 6 years, she's still clinging to my son like a leech. No shame at all." Meredith straightened her spine and faced a woman thousands of times more powerful without trembling. "I'm not clinging to anyone. I'm protecting my son from people like you. People who tried to burn us alive." Constance faltered for a fraction of a second at that boldness. Grant stepped in smoothly, his tone like oil poured over water. "Perhaps we should all calm down. This is clearly a terrible misunderstanding. Father, mother, brother." Jared's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood at the living room entrance, gray eyes cold as tempered steel. "No one invited you." Harrison turned to face his son, his expression calm as if everything remained under control. "Son, this is a family matter. We should speak privately." Jared glanced at Meredith and gave a slight nod. "Take Aiden upstairs." She hesitated, looking from Jared to Harrison and back again. She didn't want to leave him alone with them. But with Aiden here, she couldn't risk it. She nodded and took her son's hand. "Come on." Aiden reluctantly closed his book, casting his grandparents a cool, curious look before allowing his mother to lead him away. When their footsteps faded up the staircase, Harrison dropped the mask. His face hardened, eyes turning to stone. How much to make her disappear again? Rage flared in Jared's chest like a blaze. "What did you just say?" "Don't be naive, Jared." Harrison flicked his hand as if brushing away a fly. "She wants money. That's all her kind ever wants. Like last time, she'll take a check and vanish." "Last time?" Jared asked, his voice so dangerous even Grant took a step back. Grant tried to soothe. "Younger brother, Father only wants to protect you. She's obviously a con artist. The child could belong to anyone." Jared turned to look at him, and Grant fell silent under that stare. 6 years, Jared said slowly, each word like a bullet. 6 years she lived in poverty, running from city to city, working 2 or 3 jobs a day to raise her son. If she wanted money, why didn't she sell the ring I gave her? He looked straight at his father. She didn't sell it, she kept it. Through 12 cities, through hungry nights, through near discoveries. She held onto that ring like her life depended on it. Does that sound like the act of someone who only wants money, father? Harrison said nothing, but his eyes didn't waver. The silence grew heavy as lead. Then Jared spoke again, and his voice was no longer a son addressing his father. It was Thornton, the man who ruled one of the largest criminal empires on the East Coast. Meredith and Aiden are under my protection now. Anyone who touches them, even a single hair, answers to me. Not to Jared, the son you think you can manipulate. To Jared Thornton, head of this organization. Harrison stepped forward. Are you threatening your own family? I'm warning the people who tried to kill my son's mother. Jared replied without yielding an inch. The fire 6 years ago. I know you were behind it. The only question is who else was involved. Constance drew in a sharp breath. Grant went rigid. Harrison looked at his son, and for a fleeting moment something shifted behind his cold eyes. Not regret. Not fear. Calculation. We'll talk later, he said at last, as calmly as if discussing the weather. When you've cooled down. He turned and walked toward the door. Constance followed without a word, though the last glance she cast toward the staircase was venomous. Grant lingered. He stepped close to Jared and placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of false, brotherly warmth. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, he murmured, as if sharing a secret. But I understand. She's beautiful. The boy's charming. I just hope you won't regret it. Then he patted Jared's shoulder and walked out after their parents. Jared stood alone in the living room, watching the 3 black cars roll through the gates. There was something in Grant's voice that stayed with him. It wasn't a brother's concern. It wasn't family advice. It was the tone of a man who knew something others didn't. The tone of a threat. And Jared Thornton, ruler of the Thornton Empire, never ignored a threat. That night, when the entire mansion had fallen asleep, Jared sat alone in his private office. The desk lamp cast long shadows across the oak-paneled walls, turning the room as somber as his thoughts. The whiskey in his glass had been gone for some time, but he didn't pour another. He needed a clear mind for the conversation ahead. A soft knock sounded at the door. Come in, Conrad. The door opened and Conrad stepped inside. The 45-year-old man had stood beside Jared for 15 years, from the first days he took control of the organization from his father. Conrad wasn't just his right hand. He was the only man Jared had ever trusted completely, in a world lined with daggers behind every back. Or at least, that was what he had once believed. You called for me, boss? Sit. Jared gestured to the chair across from him. Conrad sat, spine straight, face expressionless as always. But Jared had worked with him long enough to recognize the tension beneath that calm surface. The silence stretched. Jared looked straight into Conrad's eyes, and the man didn't look away. You knew about her, didn't you? Jared asked, his voice stripped of emotion. Conrad didn't answer immediately. His silence lingered too long enough to become an answer in itself. Don't lie to me, Conrad, Jared said evenly, though his gray eyes had darkened. I saw your reaction the night the boy appeared. When I said Meredith Ashford's name, you paused a beat too long before answering. You never pause too long, unless you're hiding something. Conrad exhaled, heavy as if setting down a burden he had carried for years. His shoulders dipped slightly, and for a moment he no longer looked like the feared right hand of Thornton. He looked like a tired man worn down by secrets too large to bear. I knew her, Conrad said at last. 7 years ago, I knew about her and about you. Jared said nothing. He waited. You loved her, boss. Truly loved her. I've followed you for 15 years, but I'd never seen you as happy as you were in those months. When you were with her, you laughed. You truly laughed. Not the cold smile you use in negotiations. The laugh of a man in love. Each word settled into the empty spaces in Jared's mind like pieces of a puzzle. He still couldn't remember, yet somehow he knew it was true. Why didn't you tell me? Jared asked, bitterness bleeding through. For 6 years. Why didn't you say a word? Conrad looked down at his hands. After the accident, Mr. Harrison gave an order. Anyone who mentioned Meredith Ashford's name in front of you would be dealt with. Not fired, boss. Dealt with. He lifted his gaze, remorse etched there. I have a family. My daughter was 10 at the time. I couldn't... You chose silence, Jared cut in, his voice sharp as a blade. You watched me live like a shell for 6 years, never understanding why something felt missing, and you said nothing. I chose to live, Conrad replied. No excuses, no plea for forgiveness. And I've regretted it every day since. Every time I saw you sitting alone in this empty mansion, I wondered if I should speak. But then I thought about my daughter, and I stayed quiet. Jared clenched his jaw, anger rising hot in his chest. But he couldn't fully blame Conrad. He knew his father's cruelty. He knew the cost of defying Harrison Thornton. But I wasn't completely silent, Conrad continued, his tone shifting. The night her apartment was set on fire, I was the one who called her. Jared froze. What? I overheard the plan. I knew they were going at 2 a.m. I called her at 1:55. I said one sentence. Run. Now. Through the window. Then I hung up. Conrad met his eyes steadily. She jumped out 5 minutes before they arrived. If not for that call, she and the child she was carrying would have died in that fire. Jared felt the air leave his lungs. If not for you, she and my son would be dead. Yes, Conrad nodded. That was the only thing I dared to do, and I still regret not doing more. Silence filled the room again. Jared didn't know whether to rage or to give thanks. Conrad had betrayed him with 6 years of silence. But he had also saved Meredith and Aiden. Without him, Jared would never have had the chance to meet his son. I'm sorry, boss, Conrad said quietly. I should have done more. I should have found a way to tell you. I should have... Who ordered the fire? Jared cut in, his voice turning to ice. Conrad hesitated, then lowered his eyes. The order came from Mr. Grant, approved by Mr. Harrison. Jared felt his blood turn cold. Grant, his brother, the man who had patted his shoulder that afternoon and warned him about making the biggest mistake of his life. And my accident? Jared asked, his voice now a dangerous whisper. Conrad shook his head. I don't have proof. No one spoke plainly in front of me. He paused, weighing his next words. But? Your car was borrowed by Mr. Grant that morning. He said he heard something wrong with the engine and wanted it checked. It was returned before you drove to meet your family. Jared rose and walked to the window, turning into the darkness, swallowing the gardens. His brother had tried to kill him, had burned the home of the woman he loved, had stolen 6 years of fatherhood from him. For what? Power. The inheritance. A jealousy that had been smoldering for years. Find proof, Jared said, his voice stripped of all emotion. Whatever it costs. I want to know exactly who did what. Every single one. Yes, boss. Jared didn't turn around. And Conrad, thank you for saving them. Conrad stood and bowed his head, though Jared couldn't see it. It was the least I could do. When the door closed behind him, Jared remained at the window, staring into the night. Somewhere in this house, Meredith and Aiden were sleeping, unaware that the darkness was tightening around them, and Jared swore to himself that he would protect them, even if he had to burn the whole world down. Conrad worked faster than Jared expected. Only 2 days after their late-night conversation, he found the man they needed. His name was Victor, a former enforcer for the Thornton family, the one who had carried out the arson 6 years earlier. He had left the organization soon after, living quietly in a small town outside Boston, believing enough time had passed for everyone to forget his sins. He was wrong. Jared arrived at midnight, with only Conrad beside him. Victor's small house sat at the end of an empty alley. No streetlights, no nearby neighbors, perfect for conversations that weren't meant to be overheard. When Jared walked in, Victor was already seated, his hands bound behind his back, his face drained of color with fear. He had heard enough about Thornton to know there were things worse than death. Mr. Thornton, he stammered. I don't know why I'm here. I left the organization 6 years ago. I didn't do anything wrong. Jared didn't speak. He pulled a chair forward, sat across from Victor, and simply looked at him. Silence, gray eyes cold as forged steel. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. With every second, more sweat gathered on Victor's brow. In this world, the men who shouted and threatened weren't the most frightening. It was the ones who stayed silent and waited. 6 years ago, Jared finally said, his voice low and even like a funeral bell. An apartment on the outskirts of the city was set on fire at 2 a.m. A pregnant woman had to jump from the 2nd floor to survive. Her name was Meredith Ashford. Victor went rigid. Don't. One word, and Victor's mouth snapped shut. I'm not asking whether you did it. I'm telling you what I already know. The only question is whether you're going to tell me what I don't, or whether I'll have to find out my own way. Jared rose and stepped closer. And believe me, you don't want me to find out my own way. No one knew exactly what happened inside that house over the next 2 hours. Conrad stood guard outside and heard no screaming, only Jared's steady, measured voice and Victor's trembling replies. Sometimes silence is more terrifying than any cry. When Jared stepped out, his face was expressionless, but his eyes had changed, darker, colder, like a man who had just stared into hell. Victor confessed, he told Conrad, his tone flat enough to chill the air. The fire was a direct order from Grant. Harrison knew and approved. The original goal was to scare her into disappearing. If that failed, they would have taken care of both her and the unborn child. Conrad said nothing. As for my accident, Jared continued, his voice trembling despite his effort to steady it. Victor didn't do it, but he knows who did. Grant's personal mechanic. He cut my brake lines that night. Boss. My brother tried to kill me, Conrad. Something in his voice cracked. Grant told Victor that if I died, he would take my place. If I lived but lost my memory, that worked too. As long as I forgot that bartender, forgot everything that made me want to leave the family. He stood there in the dark, shoulders shaking not from cold. 6 years, Conrad. 6 years I lived like a hollow shell, not knowing why something always felt missing, not knowing why I couldn't love anyone else, not knowing why every night I dreamed of eyes without knowing who they belonged to. He turned to face him. Turns out my own family stole everything, and I never even knew. They drove back to Thornton Manor in silence. When they arrived, Jared didn't go to his bedroom. He went straight to his office, shut the door, and left the lights off. He sat alone in the darkness with the truths that had just surfaced. His father had approved the burning of a pregnant woman's home. His mother had known and remained silent. His brother had tried to kill him for the inheritance. And he, Jared Thornton, the feared head of the empire, had known nothing. For 6 years he had trusted them, believed they were protecting him after the accident, believed they cared when he couldn't remember. In truth, they had simply kept him locked inside a cage of their own making. Jared poured a glass of whiskey and drank it down, then another, a third. By the fourth, his hand trembled so badly the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering across the floor. A shard cut into his palm, blood rising bright and warm, but he didn't notice. He stared at the broken pieces at his feet and wondered if his life had shattered the same way long ago without him ever realizing. Jared? The soft voice at the door made him lift his head. Meredith stood there, chestnut hair falling over her shoulders, eyes filled with concern in the moonlight spilling through the window. She had heard the crash and come to see. She stepped inside and saw him in the dark corner, eyes red, hand bleeding, glass scattered around him. And she understood. She said nothing. She moved carefully through the shards and knelt beside him. Taking a handkerchief from her pocket, she gently wrapped his wounded hand. Jared let her. No resistance, no words. They took everything from me, he said at last, his voice breaking. You, my son, even the memory of you. 6 years I should have watched him grow, heard him call me dad for the first time, taught him to ride a bike, read him stories every night. He looked up at her, and Meredith saw something she never thought she would see. Tears in those cold gray eyes. My family did this. My father, my brother, the people who were supposed to protect me. Meredith paused, her hand resting against his cheek. I hated you for 6 years, she said softly. I thought you chose them over us. I thought you didn't love me enough to fight, but now I understand. She wiped the tears from his face, tears he hadn't even realized were falling. You were a victim too, Jared. They stole everything from you as well. The only difference is you didn't even know what you'd lost. For the first time in 6 years, Jared let the tears fall freely, not out of weakness, but because someone finally understood. We can't get those 6 years back, Meredith said, her voice trembling but steady. We can't turn back time. We can't erase what happened, but we can choose what happens next. Jared looked at her, his gray eyes no longer cold, only tired and longing to heal. You're still here. After everything my family did to you, after 6 years of running, after all of it, why? Meredith gave him a sad but honest smile. Because Aiden deserves to know who his father is, to know his father didn't abandon him. She drew in a breath. And because a part of me never stopped loving you, Jared. No matter how hard I tried. 3 days passed in a fragile, almost deceptive peace. Meredith allowed herself to relax, if only a little. Thornton Manor, with its high walls and tight security, felt safer than anywhere she had lived in the past 6 years. Aiden adapted with surprising ease. He spent hours in the vast garden behind the estate, exploring every bush and tree like a small explorer in a new kingdom. Sometimes Jared stood at his office window watching his son play, and on the cold face of the feared Mafia boss, there appeared a fleeting smile that only Meredith seemed to notice. On the morning of the 4th day, Meredith stood by the living room window, a cup of hot tea in her hands, watching Aiden chase a butterfly across the lawn. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful, and that was exactly what set her survival instincts ringing. Her gaze drifted toward the large iron gates at the end of the long driveway. A black car was parked outside, about 50 meters away. She frowned. The car looked familiar. She had seen it yesterday, and the day before. 6 years of living in fear had taught Meredith one thing. Nothing is coincidence. She set her cup down and hurried into the kitchen. Brenda, the loyal housekeeper of Thornton Manor, was preparing lunch. The older woman, her silver hair neatly pinned up and her eyes kind, had served the Thornton family since before Jared was born. "Brenda," Meredith said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "Do you know whose black car is parked outside the gate?" Brenda paused, glancing toward the window, though the gate couldn't be seen from the kitchen. "What black car, Miss Meredith?" "No one informed me of any visitors. It's been there for 2 days. I thought it belonged to Jared's people." Brenda shook her head, confusion clouding her face. "Not ours. I recognize every vehicle that belongs to Mr. Thornton and the security team." Meredith felt her blood run cold. She turned and walked quickly toward the garden, forcing herself not to draw attention. "Aiden," she called, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "Come inside with Mom. It's too sunny now." Aiden looked up at her with his intelligent green eyes. He was used to sudden shifts like this. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and ran inside. Meredith led him into the living room and closed all the curtains. Her hands trembled as she took out her phone and dialed Jared. "Meredith?" he answered after 2 rings. She could hear voices in the background. He was in a meeting with allies. "Someone is watching us," she said quickly, keeping her voice low. "A black car outside the gate for 2 days. Not yours." A second of silence. Then Jared's voice changed, sharp and cold as a blade. "Stay inside. Don't go out. Lock every door. I'm coming home." He hung up without another word. Meredith held Aiden close as they sat on the sofa and waited. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. Then the doorbell rang. Meredith flinched, gripping Aiden's hand. She heard Brenda's footsteps moving toward the door. "Brenda, don't!" Meredith shouted, but it was too late. The door opened. A man's voice spoke briefly. Brenda thanked him, the sound of a cardboard box being opened. Then Brenda's scream tore through the house. Meredith jumped to her feet and ran into the hallway, Aiden clinging behind her. Brenda stood frozen, face drained of color, hands shaking as she held a cardboard box. Inside was a doll. A cheap plastic doll like those sold in toy stores, but its face had been burned black, the melted plastic twisted into something grotesque. Beneath it lay a sheet of white paper with scrawled handwriting. "This time we won't miss." Meredith felt as if ice water had been poured down her spine. 6 years. 6 years of running, changing names, moving from city to city, and they had still found her. They had never let go. "Mom?" Aiden's small voice came from beside her. She turned, kneeling to his level and pulling him into her arms. He didn't cry. He was used to not crying, but his small hands clutched her shirt and trembled. "Mom, they found us, didn't they?" Meredith swallowed the tears rising in her throat. "Don't be afraid. Dad is coming. Dad will protect us." She said it, and she wanted to believe it more than anything. 15 minutes later, engines roared into the driveway. The front door burst open and Jared entered like a storm, Conrad close behind. He saw Meredith and Aiden huddled on the sofa, saw Brenda still shaking with the box in her hands, and his eyes darkened. Jared took the box from Brenda. He looked at the burned doll and read the message. His face remained stone cold, but his gray eyes ignited with a fire Meredith had never seen before. It was the look of a man ready to kill. "Conrad." His voice was so cold the air itself seemed to freeze. "Boss." The car drove off right after the package was delivered. Conrad reported. But I got the plate. Find out who it belongs to. Now. Conrad nodded and left at once. Jared knelt in front of Meredith and Aiden. He placed one hand on Meredith's shoulder and the other on Aiden's head. From now on, you don't leave my sight, he said, his voice softer but iron firm. Where I go, you go. Even when you sleep, there will be guards. No one touches you while I'm alive. Aiden looked up at him, eyes no longer frightened. You'll chase the bad people away, right? For a moment, the ruthless Mafia boss vanished, leaving only a father. I promise. That night, Jared sat in a chair outside Meredith and Aiden's bedroom. He didn't sleep. He leaned against the wall, gray eyes fixed on the dark hallway. Soft footsteps approached. Conrad appeared, his face tight. Boss, I traced the license plate. And? Conrad swallowed. The car belongs to a transport company. That company is a subsidiary of Thornton Logistics. Jared frowned. Thornton Logistics was one of the family's legitimate businesses, run directly by Grant. Who registered the vehicle for use? Mr. Grant's office boss. Silence settled over the corridor. Jared looked toward the window at the far end, where darkness swallowed the gardens. Grant, his brother, the man who had tried to kill him 6 years ago, the man who had burned Meredith's home, and now the man sending threats to his doorstep. He's testing me, Jared said, his voice like grinding steel. He thinks I'm still the naive younger brother from 6 years ago. He's wrong. 2 days later, Jared's phone rang at 7 o'clock in the evening. He was having dinner with Meredith and Aiden in the grand dining room, and for the first time in years, the room no longer felt cold. When he saw the caller's name, his face darkened. I need to take this. He rose and stepped into the hallway. Meredith watched him go, unease rising in her chest. A few minutes later, he returned, tension carved into his features. Warehouse number 3 is under attack. I have to go. Now? Meredith stood, her hand instinctively gripping Aiden's shoulder. Now. Jared stepped close and cupped her cheek. Conrad will stay with 5 of the best guards. Don't leave the house. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll be back as soon as I can. Meredith nodded, but something inside her was screaming that this was wrong. 6 years of running had taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts were telling her this was a mistake. Jared, she caught his hand. Be careful. He looked at her for a long moment, then bent and kissed her forehead. I promise. Then he left. Meredith stood at the window and watched his convoy disappear beyond the iron gates. The sky was turning deep violet, dark clouds rolling in from the sea. A storm was coming, in every sense of the word. 45 minutes later, Jared reached warehouse number 3, a massive building in an industrial district on the outskirts of the city. He stepped out of the car, his hand already resting on the gun at his side. But there was nothing. No gunfire, no smoke, no sign of any attack. The warehouse stood silent in the darkness, doors locked, not a scratch in sight. Jared felt the blood in his veins turn cold. He pulled out his phone and called the man who had reported the assault. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. A trap, he whispered, his heart pounding. He turned to the driver. Go back, now. On the way back, he called Conrad. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. He tried the mansion's emergency line. Silence. Faster! He barked at the driver. As fast as you can. At Thornton Manor, it began at 8:15. Meredith was reading to Aiden in the living room when the lights suddenly went out. The entire mansion plunged into darkness. Mom? Aiden's small voice trembled in the blackness. Quiet, sweetheart, Meredith whispered, survival instinct snapping into place. She pulled him to the floor behind the sofa. Then the gunshots came. 1, 2, 3, from the main gate. Shouting, running footsteps, then silence. A silence more terrifying than the shots. Meredith didn't wait. She scooped Aiden into her arms, covering his mouth gently to keep him from making a sound, and moved. Jared had shown her the safe room the day after she arrived. Basement level. Behind the wine cellar, a hidden steel door. She had to reach it. In the darkness, Meredith moved like a shadow. 6 years of running had taught her how to become invisible. She knew every corner of this house, had memorized the steps from the living room to the basement stairs. Aiden stayed silent in her arms. No tears, no cries. He was used to this, used to running through the night, and that knowledge broke her heart. As she passed the first-floor corridor, She saw Conrad. He lay motionless on the ground, a thin pool of blood near his head. Meredith froze for a second and checked him. Still breathing, only unconscious. But she couldn't help him now. Not now. She kept moving. Down the basement stairs, past the wine racks, to the steel door. She entered the code Jared had given her. The lock clicked open. She pushed Aiden inside, stepped in after him, and sealed the door. The safe room was small but fortified, stocked with water and food for days, equipped with a private phone line. Meredith grabbed the phone and called Jared. "Jared," she whispered when he answered. "They're here. Conrad's down. We're in the safe room. I'm on my way back," Jared said, his voice pulled tight. 10 minutes. Stay hidden. Don't open the door for anyone. Jared, I'll be there. I promise." He hung up. Meredith held Aiden close as they crouched in the corner of the safe room and waited. Outside, heavy footsteps echoed. Fists pounded on doors. Voices shouted, "Search everywhere. They can't have gone far." Then the pounding reached the safe room door. Boom, boom, boom. "We know you're in there. Open up." Meredith clutched Aiden tighter. Her body trembled, but she made no sound. Neither did he. His eyes were wide in the darkness, but he didn't cry. Boom, 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 then a beep. The sound of a lock disengaging. Meredith stopped breathing. The steel door creaked open, flashlight beams cutting into the room, but the figure who stepped inside wasn't an enemy. It was a young woman with auburn hair, her face streaked with dirt and scratches, a gun in her hand. "Paige?" Meredith whispered, recognizing Jared's younger sister. "Come with me," Paige said urgently. "There's a hidden exit. Hurry." "How do I know you're not with them?" Meredith didn't move, her instincts refusing to trust anyone. Paige met her eyes, sincerity burning there. "Because I'm the one who left you the information about the car watching the gate. I've been trying to warn you from the beginning. I know you have no reason to trust me, but if you don't leave now, they'll breach this door in minutes." Meredith looked at her for one long second. Then she made her choice. "Let's go." The three of them slipped through a narrow door at the back of the safe room into a dark, damp tunnel running beneath the mansion toward the beach. Paige led the way, Meredith carrying Aiden close behind. Behind them, angry shouts erupted as Grant's men discovered the safe room empty. "They're gone. Search. Find them." But it was too late. The three figures had already vanished into the darkness of the tunnel, running toward the faint glimmer of light at the far end, toward freedom, toward Jared. The tunnel was long and dark, the smell of damp earth thick in the air, but none of them slowed. Paige led the way with a small flashlight, Meredith carrying Aiden close behind. Their footsteps moved quickly over the wet ground, their breathing echoing in the narrow space. After about 5 minutes, they saw moonlight at the end of the passage. The exit opened onto a small beach beneath the cliffs, where Thornton Manor rose high above. A black car waited in the shadows of large rocks, its lights off. "Get in," Paige said, opening the back door. "Quick, before they discover this exit." Meredith placed Aiden in the back seat and climbed in beside him. Paige slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. She turned to Meredith, guilt heavy in her eyes. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," Meredith replied wearily. "You just saved our lives." "No, you need to know." Paige drew a deep breath. "I knew about you 7 years ago. I was the only one in the family who knew about you and Jared. He told me because we were closest, and I saw him happy for the first time in his life." Her voice softened. "The night of the accident, Jared was on his way to tell the family about you. He was going to announce he was leaving the organization, handing everything to Grant, starting over. Grant knew, and he acted before Jared could arrive." Meredith felt as if her heart were being crushed. She had known this truth, but hearing it from Paige made it sharper, more real. "Why didn't you tell Jared after he woke up?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell him about me?" Paige lowered her head, hair falling across her face. "I was 25, afraid. My father threatened to cut me off completely if I said a word. I thought I had no choice. I thought I was protecting myself." She looked up, eyes red. "I was a coward. I've lived with that guilt for 6 years." Silence settled inside the car. Aiden had fallen asleep against Meredith's shoulder, exhausted. She stroked his hair, unsure what to say. "But there's something you don't know," Paige continued, her voice gentler now. Jared didn't completely forget you. Meredith froze. He said he remembers nothing. Not consciously. Paige nodded. But every night during the first year after the accident, he called a name in his sleep. Mary. Meredith's heart stopped. He called my name. No one knew who Mary was. He didn't either when he woke. But I knew. I knew it was you. Even if his memory was erased, something deeper still remembered. Tears slid down Meredith's face. For 6 years she had believed he had erased her entirely. Believed she had been nothing more than a passing dream. But no. Some part of him had held on, called her name in the dark, refused to let go. My father found out, Paige said bitterly. He hired specialists to bury what little memory remained. They hypnotized Jared, convinced him the dreams of Mary were just hallucinations from brain trauma, that Mary wasn't real, that he should forget. What did they do to him? Meredith whispered, her voice breaking. They stole him, Paige replied softly. Not once. Every single day. The roar of an engine cut through the night. Headlights swept across the beach as a familiar car sped toward them at reckless speed. The door flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Jared jumped out and ran toward them like a man possessed. Meredith had barely opened the door when he was there, pulling her and Aiden into his arms, holding them as if they might disappear if he let go. Are you okay? His voice trembled, nothing like the cold boss the world knew. Is he okay? Did anyone hurt you? We're okay, Meredith whispered into his shoulder. Paige saved us. Aiden, awakened by the commotion, looked up at his father. I wasn't scared, Dad. I knew you'd come. Jared met his son's eyes, something fierce and tender flashing there. He smoothed a hand over the boy's dark hair. I'll always come, son. Always. Another car pulled in behind them. Conrad stepped out, a white bandage wrapped around his head, his face pale but steady. Jared's men had found him and brought him here. Boss. Conrad nodded. I'm sorry they got inside. Not your fault, Jared replied, his gaze lifting toward Thornton Manor looming on the cliff, lights still faintly glowing. Is Grant inside? Yes, boss. He's waiting. He probably thinks Meredith and Aiden have been captured. Jared straightened, his gray eyes turning cold again, hard as winter steel. He turned to Meredith and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Stay here with Paige. Wait for me. Jared. She caught his hand. Be careful. For a brief second, the ruthless mask fell away. Only the man who loved her remained. This is between me and my brother, he said quietly but firmly. 6 years ago, he took everything from me. Tonight, I take it back. Then he turned and walked toward the mansion, his figure fading into the night. Conrad followed, along with Jared's most loyal men. Meredith stood there holding Aiden's hand, her heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen inside that house. She only knew that when Jared returned, nothing would ever be the same again. One way or another, the car sat motionless on the beach, far enough from Thornton Manor to remain hidden, yet close enough to see the faint glow from its windows. Waves rolled against the rocks in a steady rhythm, like the breathing of some vast creature asleep in the dark. Inside the car, Aiden had fallen asleep in Meredith's arms, his face finally peaceful after a night of terror. She looked down at him, her fingers gently stroking the smooth black hair identical to Jared's. He was only 5 years old, and already he had endured too much. Running, hiding, living in shadows. That wasn't a life meant for a child. Paige sat in the driver's seat, staring toward the mansion with open worry. Silence stretched between the two women, heavy as the air before a storm. At last, Paige spoke. Are you going to stay with him? Meredith didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on Aiden, her hand moving slowly through his hair. The question had been circling in her mind since the moment she stepped into Thornton Manor. Stay or leave, choose love or choose safety. I'd understand if you walked away, Paige continued when Meredith remained quiet. Jared's world isn't a place for a child. You saw tonight. That's only a small part of what it can be. Meredith lifted her gaze to the window. The sea was ink black, moonlight trembling on the waves. She thought about the past 6 years. 6 years of running, 12 cities, countless damp rented rooms, low-paying jobs, sleepless nights at every unfamiliar sound. She had done all of it to protect Aiden from this world, from the Thornton family, from the darkness that had almost killed them. And now she was sitting here, at the heart of the storm, waiting for the man she loved to return from a confrontation that could cost him his life. If she stayed, Aiden would grow up in Jared's world, a world of guns and blood, a world of enemies hiding in shadows, waiting to strike. Her son would learn how to live with danger, learn not to trust easily, learn to harden before his time. But if she left, she would run again, this time not only from the Thorntons, but from Jared himself, from the man who had whispered her name in his sleep for a year without knowing who she was, from the father Aiden deserved to have. A memory rose suddenly in her mind, 7 years ago, in her small apartment, candlelight flickering, Jared holding her hands, his gray eyes warmer than she had ever seen them. "I want a normal family," he had said softly. "A small house, a garden, the sound of children laughing. You beside me every morning when I wake. I want all of it. With you." That was the promise from 7 years ago, before the accident. Before his family stole everything, before their world collapsed. Could he keep that promise now, after everything? "What are you thinking?" Paige asked gently. Meredith looked down at Aiden. Even in sleep, the boy resembled Jared so painfully it made her chest ache. The same strong jaw, the same straight nose, the same high brow. Her son was his father's mirror image, except for the eyes he inherited from her. 6 years, she said quietly, as if speaking from far away. 6 years I ran because I was afraid. Afraid they'd find us. Afraid they'd hurt Aiden. Afraid of everything. She lifted her head and met Paige's gaze. "I don't want to be afraid anymore. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder every time I step outside. Tired of waking up from nightmares in the middle of the night. Tired of teaching my son how to hide instead of teaching him how to live." "So you're staying?" Paige asked, surprise clear in her voice. Meredith nodded slowly. "I'm staying, but not because of Jared." She looked down at Aiden again. "Because my son deserves a father, deserves to know who his father is, deserves protection stronger than a single mother, with nothing but survival instincts." She drew in a deep breath. "And because I want to see whether the man I love can truly change, whether he can step out of the darkness and into the light, whether he can keep the promise he made to me 7 years ago." Paige looked at her with something close to admiration. She reached over and took Meredith's hand. "You're braver than I've ever been. I grew up in that family and never dared to stand against them. You had nothing, and you're still choosing to stay and fight." Meredith gave a tired, bittersweet smile. "It's not bravery. It's just that I'm tired of running. Sometimes standing still and facing what's coming is easier than running forever." Silence settled again. The two women sat there watching the mansion on the cliff, waiting. Then gunshots shattered the night. 1, 2, 3. Meredith flinched, her hand tightening around Aiden even though he remained asleep. Her heart raced, breath caught in her chest. She stared at Thornton Manor, its lights still faint against the darkness. Jared was inside, facing his brother, fighting for the family he had just found again. "Please be safe, Jared," she whispered, not knowing who she was praying to. God, the universe, or simply her own trembling heart. The gunfire stopped. Silence returned, and Meredith waited, her fingers still wrapped around her son's hand, her eyes fixed on the mansion above where the fate of her life and Aiden's was being decided. Jared entered Thornton Manor through the back entrance, where his men had already cleared a path. Grant's crew, the ones who had stormed the estate that night, lay scattered across the corridors and courtyard. Some were unconscious. Some were neatly restrained. None were still fighting. Jared's men were efficient and ruthless, just like their leader. He stepped over the bodies without hesitation, gray eyes cold as forged steel. He knew exactly where Grant would be. All their lives growing up in this house, the grand living room had been Grant's favorite place. The throne room, the place where he could sit like a king and look down on everyone else. Jared pushed the doors open. Grant stood alone before the massive fireplace, a glass of wine in his hand as if this were any ordinary evening. He turned at the sound of the door, that familiar smile curling on his lips, the smile Jared had despised his entire life, the smile of a man who believed he stood above all others. "You're here," Grant said lightly, as though greeting a guest. "Faster than I expected. I thought you'd be busy chasing after that bartender and the kid." "The game is over, Grant," Jared replied, his voice flat and dangerous. "Your men are down. There's nowhere left for you to run." Grant stared at him, something unhinged flickering in his eyes. Then he laughed, the sound cracking like splintering glass. Game? You think this is a game? He hurled the wine glass against the wall. It shattered, red liquid splashing like blood. This isn't a game, Jared. This is my whole life. He stepped forward, his face twisted with rage and long-buried hatred. You always had everything. Since we were children, Father chose you. Thornton will belong to Jared. Jared is smarter. Jared is stronger. Jared deserves it. And me? I was the backup. The eldest son who was never good enough. So you decided to kill me? Jared asked calmly, though anger churned beneath his control. 6 years ago you cut my brakes. You burned the home of the woman I love. You stole my memories. All because of jealousy? Jealousy? Grant roared. You call that jealousy? I deserved it more than you. I worked my entire life while you threw it away for a woman beneath us. You were going to abandon everything, Thornton. The family. For some cheap bartender. Jared moved closer, slow and deliberate. She's worth more than this empire, he said, voice hard as steel. More than everything you and Father built with other people's blood. And you'll answer for trying to take her from me. Grant pulled a knife from behind his back, the blade flashing under the chandelier. Then come on, little brother. End it like men. He lunged, the knife aimed for Jared's chest. But Jared was ready. He pivoted aside, seized Grant's wrist with one hand, and drove a fist into his face with the other. Grant staggered, but didn't drop the blade. He charged again, eyes wild. The brothers collided in the center of the room, crashing into furniture, splintering polished wood, shattering priceless decor. Jared was stronger, faster, and most of all, controlled. Grant's fury made him reckless. Jared fought with the cold precision of a man trained from childhood. Within minutes, Jared overpowered him. He twisted Grant's arm, kicked the knife away, and forced him face down onto the floor. His knee pressed into his brother's back. You lost, Jared said, breathing hard but steady. It's over. Let him go, Jared. The voice from the doorway froze him. He looked up and felt his heart stutter. Harrison Thornton stood at the threshold, immaculate in his three-piece suit, a gun aimed directly at Jared's head. Father? Jared whispered. I can't let you destroy this family, Harrison said evenly, as if discussing business. Release Grant. Step back. Jared slowly rose, letting Grant go but refusing to retreat. He faced his father, gray eyes blazing. I'm the one destroying it? He asked bitterly. I didn't cut my own brakes. I didn't burn down a pregnant woman's home. I didn't hire specialists to erase my son's memories. He stepped forward despite the gun. You did. You helped Grant try to kill me. You drove my son's mother away. You stole 6 years of my life. And you call me the destroyer? It was for the survival of Thornton, Harrison shouted, losing composure for the first time. You were going to abandon everything for that woman. Betray your own blood. I did what was necessary to protect this family. Put the gun down, Father. Another voice echoed from behind Harrison. He turned, stunned. Paige stood there, dirt streaking her face, eyes steady despite the tears. In her hand was a phone, the screen glowing. I recorded everything, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. From the moment you walked into this room, every word you just said, every confession. If you shoot Jared, this file goes to the FBI in 5 minutes. Harrison stared at his youngest child, color draining from his face. You would betray your own family? I'm saving it, Paige replied, tears falling freely now. Saving it from you, from the madness you and Grant created. I love you, but I won't let you kill my brother. Silence engulfed the room. Harrison stood motionless, the gun still in his hand, but no longer aimed. He looked from Paige to Jared, from Jared to Grant sprawled on the floor, and then into the empty space ahead, as if watching his empire crumble before him. Slowly, he lowered the weapon. The face of Harrison Thornton, once the most powerful man on the East Coast, collapsed like a sandcastle before the tide. Take them away, Conrad, Jared said, exhaustion heavy in his voice, but resolve unshaken. Both of them. Conrad entered with 2 men and cuffed Grant and Harrison. Grant shouted as they dragged him toward the door. You'll regret this. You can't run the organization alone. Without Father, without me, you'll fail. Jared watched his brother go, his gray eyes no longer burning with rage, only with a weary clarity. You're right, he said quietly. I won't run it alone. I'll run it with my family. My real family. News spread like wildfire through the underworld. In less than 24 hours after that fateful night, every crime boss on the East Coast knew what had happened at Thornton Manor. Jared Thornton had overthrown his own father and brother. Harrison and Grant Thornton had been handed over to federal authorities with sufficient evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and a long list of other charges. The Thornton Empire, one of the most powerful organizations for more than 40 years, was shaking to its very foundation. 3 days later, Thornton's allies demanded a meeting. Not a polite request, but a demand. In this world, weakness was an invitation for vultures, and they could smell blood. The meeting took place in the grand conference room of Thornton Manor. 7 men sat around the long oak table, each representing a segment of the power network stretching across the East Coast. They were longtime allies of the Thornton family, men who had grown rich and formidable through this partnership. And now, they were uneasy. Marcus Webb, the boss who controlled the ports of Boston, spoke first. A 60-year-old man with silver hair and hawk-like eyes. He had worked with Harrison Thornton since before Jared was born. "Jared," he said, his voice openly laced with contempt. "You handed your own father and brother to the federal government. Blood relatives. That forces us to question your loyalty." Jared sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. "They tried to kill me. They tried to kill my son. Loyalty must be answered with loyalty, Marcus. They offered none." Another boss, Felix Romano from Philadelphia, leaned in. "But the news also says you're living with a woman and a child. An unknown bartender, correct? Thornton is weakening, Jared. If you're distracted by a woman and a kid, how can we trust you to protect this alliance?" Jared didn't answer at once. He let his gaze travel around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. Some were truly concerned. Some were calculating betrayal. Some were simply waiting to see what he would do. "What would you like me to prove?" he asked coolly. "That I can still be ruthless? That I can still kill without blinking? That I'm willing to sacrifice my family for power?" Marcus gave a short nod. "Exactly. That's how this world works, boy. Your father understood that. You need to understand it." Jared rose and walked to the window. Outside, the garden was washed in the warm light of late afternoon. Meredith was there, walking hand in hand with Aiden among the flower beds. The boy pointed at a red rose and said something that made Meredith laugh. Jared couldn't hear the sound, but he could see the smile he had missed for 6 long years. "Give me time to think," he said without turning back. "We'll continue after dinner." The bosses exchanged glances and filed out. They would wait, but not for long. Jared left the conference room and went to find Meredith. She wasn't in the garden anymore. He found her in the bedroom, a suitcase open on the bed, clothes neatly folded inside. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice steady though something inside it cracked. Meredith didn't turn around. "I heard the meeting. I was standing outside the door." She paused, her shoulders trembling slightly. "Aiden and I are costing you everything, Jared. You're losing allies, losing power, losing what you've built, because of us." "Meredith, 6 years ago I left to protect my son. Now I'm leaving to protect you." She finally faced him, her eyes rimmed red. "You can't have both, Jared. You can't be the head of this world and be a normal father and husband. They won't allow it." He stepped closer and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, an anchor that held her in place. "Do you really think I would choose them over you?" he asked quietly, emotion threading through his voice. "Do you think I would let you walk away again? Jared, you don't understand." "No, you don't." He cut her off gently, not in anger but in resolve. "Wait for me." He released her hand and turned toward the door. "Don't go anywhere. Just wait." Jared returned to the conference room where the remaining bosses had gathered again, waiting for his decision. He stood at the head of the table and looked at each of them in turn. "You want to know if I'm still strong enough? Here's your answer," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I'm restructuring the organization. We're pulling out of violent and illegal operations and focusing on legitimate business. No more smuggling, no more extortion, no more bloodshed." A deadly silence fell. Marcus let out a harsh laugh. "You're committing suicide, Jared. No one survives in this world by playing the good man." "I'm not playing the good man," Jared replied, his voice like tempered steel. "I'm evolving. The world is changing, Marcus. The FBI and the CIA are tightening the noose. Those who refuse to adapt will die. I choose to live. He looked around the table. Anyone who disagrees is free to walk away. The alliance with Thornton ends here. No grudges. But anyone who stays will follow my rules. The new rules. Felix shot to his feet, face flushed with anger. You've lost your mind. He stormed out, 2 other bosses following behind him. Marcus studied Jared for a long moment, then rose and left as well. 4 of the 7 were gone. 3 remained, sitting in silence. One of them, Thomas Chen from New York, finally spoke. I'm staying. You're right about the FBI. I lost 2 division heads to them last year. It's time to change. The other 2 nodded in agreement. The meeting ended. Conrad entered after the last of them had gone. Sir, he said quietly, you just lost half the empire. Jared didn't answer at once. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden. Meredith had returned there. Aiden was running in circles around her, trying to catch a butterfly. She glanced up, as if sensing his gaze, and smiled. That smile was enough for him to know he had chosen correctly. I just kept something far more important, he said without turning around. 1 week after the fateful meeting, while the allies who had walked away were busy forming new coalitions, and those who remained were adjusting to the new rules, a familiar black car pulled up in front of Thornton Manor. Jared was in his office when Conrad entered to inform him. Mrs. Constance Thornton wishes to see you, sir. Jared stopped writing and set his pen down. His mother, the woman who had remained silent all those years while his father and brother dismantled his life, the woman who had stood beside Harrison in every decision, including the decision to drive Meredith away like a stray dog. Let her in, he said at last. Constance Thornton stepped into the office, and for a moment Jared barely recognized her. The woman who had always been immaculate in Chanel and pearls now looked as though she had aged 10 years in a matter of days. Her silver hair was no longer perfectly arranged. Her eyes were swollen from weeping. The shoulders that once carried themselves with icy pride now sagged as if bearing the weight of the world. The arrogance was gone. Only exhaustion and pain remained. Jared, she said, her voice trembling, I've come to apologize. He did not rise. He did not offer her a seat. He simply looked at her, gray eyes devoid of warmth. Apologize for what, Mother? He asked evenly. For helping Father drive Meredith away? For standing by while they burned down her home? For keeping silent while I lived like a corpse for 6 years? Never understanding why something inside me was always missing? Constance began to shake, tears spilling down her cheeks. For hiring a psychiatrist to bury my memories? Jared continued, his voice trembling now, not with weakness, but with fury long restrained. For helping Grant try to kill me? For stealing my son from me, 6 years I should have had as his father? I didn't know about the accident, Constance cried out desperately. I swear to you, Jared, I didn't know what Grant had done. I didn't know about the breaks. I only wanted to protect you from an unworthy marriage. Unworthy? Jared rose and stepped toward her. What do you know about Worth? She loved me, not for money, not for power, not for the name Thornton. She loved me, Jared, the son you never truly saw. He paused, drawing a breath to steady himself. She raised your grandson in poverty for 6 years, worked 2 and 3 jobs a day, ran through 12 cities. Not once did she complain. Not once did she give up. She is stronger than this entire family put together. And you call her unworthy? Constance had no answer. She stood there weeping, her lips trembling. Then her gaze drifted toward the window, and she froze. Outside in the garden, Aiden was playing with a ball. The boy laughed, dark hair falling over his forehead, small legs racing across the grass. Sunlight caught his face, and in that instant Constance saw the grandson she had nearly destroyed before he ever had the chance to be born. She whispered, her voice breaking. He looks so much like you, Jared. He is my son, Jared replied, his tone softer, but still distant. Aiden, 5 years old, your grandson, the child you nearly killed while he was still in his mother's womb. Constance collapsed to her knees, sobbing, her body shaking. I regret it. Every day I regret it, Jared. Every night I lie awake wondering how different everything would be if I had stood up to your father. If I had chosen you. If, Jared interrupted, though his voice had lost its sharp edge. Only weariness remained. If doesn't change anything. I lost 6 years. Meredith lost 6 years. Aiden grew up without a father for 6 years. No, if can give that back. Constance looked up at him, eyes red and desperate. Then what must I do? What can I do to earn your forgiveness? Jared was silent for a long moment. He looked out in the garden where Aiden was trying to toss the ball into a bucket, missing, laughing, and trying again. The boy had no idea his grandmother stood inside the house. No idea that she had once nearly taken his life before it began. Regret isn't enough, Jared said at last, his voice gentler but still guarded. I need time. A great deal of time. Maybe years. Maybe a lifetime. I don't know if I can forgive. Constance nodded slowly and rose with difficulty. She wiped her tears, gathering what composure she could. As she reached the door, she paused and turned back. Will you allow me to meet him? My grandson? Jared studied her and saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. Not hunger for power or status, just the yearning of a grandmother, the longing to see the child she had nearly lost forever. When Meredith agrees, he answered, that isn't my decision alone. She is Aiden's mother. She protected him for 6 years. If she says no, then it's no, and you will have to accept that. Constance nodded, for the first time in her life accepting that she held no authority here, no right to demand, no right to control, only the right to wait and hope. I understand, she said, and left the room, her back bent beneath the weight of years of guilt. When the sound of her car faded into the distance, Meredith appeared in the doorway. She had been standing there quietly, listening. She walked to Jared and placed a hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? He did not turn, still gazing through the window. I've lost my father, my brother, perhaps even my mother, he said softly. I should be devastated. I should be shattered. But, Meredith prompted gently. Jared turned to look at her, then back to the garden where Aiden was running toward the house, waving and grinning from ear to ear. But for the first time in my life, he said, and a faint smile touched his lips, I feel free. A week passed in fragile peace. Thornton Manor slowly began to breathe differently, no longer heavy and cold as it once had been. Aiden's laughter echoed through hallways that had known only silence. Jared began learning how to be a father, awkward but sincere. He read bedtime stories each night, though his deep, commanding voice hardly suited fairy tales. He tried teaching Aiden how to kick a soccer ball in the garden, despite never having played a single day in his life. He even attempted breakfast, though the result was usually burnt pancakes and eggs far too salty. Aiden never complained. The boy ate everything his father made with a radiant smile, as if it were the finest meal in the world. One night, around 2 o'clock in the morning, Jared woke with a strange sense that something was wrong. He stepped into the hallway and saw a faint light glowing beneath Aiden's door. He pushed it open and found the boy sitting by the window, staring out at the dark sea. Can't sleep? Jared asked softly, walking in and sitting beside him. Aiden shook his head without turning around. In the moonlight, his small face looked older than 5, burdened with something no child should carry. I need to tell you something, Dad, he said quietly, but I'm scared you'll be mad. Jared placed a hand on his son's shoulder and gently turned him so they were face to face. You can tell me anything. I promise I won't be angry. Aiden looked up, eyes shimmering with tears. He swallowed hard, gathering courage to release something that had weighed on him for weeks. The night I came here, he began, his voice trembling, I didn't get lost at the supermarket. Jared frowned. What do you mean? I lied. Aiden lowered his head as tears slid down his cheeks. Mom didn't lose me. She was taken. Jared felt as if someone had struck him in the chest. Taken? How? 2 men. They came when Mom and I were walking back from the supermarket to the hotel. They dragged her into a van. Aiden's small body shook as he sobbed. Mom told me to run. She said, Find your dad, Aiden. Find your dad. I ran. I ran as fast as I could. I acted like I cried, and pretended I was just lost so the bad men would leave me alone. I took a taxi using the emergency money and the address card Mom made me hide in my shoe for a day like this. Jared sat frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Meredith had been abducted that night. She hadn't simply lost her son at the supermarket. She had been taken, and this 5-year-old boy, his son, had crossed the city alone in a storm to find him, carrying that secret by himself. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Jared asked hoarsely. Why didn't you say something from the beginning? Aiden cried harder, truly crying for the first time since arriving at Thornton Manor. I was scared. I thought if I told you, you'd send me away to save Mom. I didn't want to leave you. I just found you. I didn't want to lose you." Jared pulled him into his arms, his heart breaking and healing all at once. His son had been so afraid of abandonment that he had carried this terrible truth alone. A 5-year-old should never bear such weight. "I will never send you away," Jared whispered into his son's hair. "Never. Do you hear me? Never." He held Aiden until exhaustion pulled the boy into sleep. Then he laid him gently in bed, tucked him in, and stepped out. He found Meredith in the reading room, curled on the sofa with a novel in her hands. She looked up the moment she saw him and knew something was wrong. "Jared? What is it?" "The night you came here," he said, his voice calm but edged with danger. "What really happened?" Meredith stiffened. She looked at him, and he saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. "Aiden told you." "Not a question." "Why didn't you tell me?" She set the book aside and stood, wrapping her arms around herself as if bracing for impact. "They took me. 2 men, threw me into a van. They said if I didn't disappear forever, they would kill Aiden." She swallowed hard. I pretended to agree, said I'd leave and never come back. They intended to make me disappear forever, but in the chaos of the storm, the van skidded. I took the chance, jumped from the moving vehicle, and hid in the darkness of the woods until they gave up searching. When he wasn't at the hotel, I nearly lost my mind. Then Conrad called and said he was here. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jared repeated, his voice no longer steady. "Because I didn't want you to see me as weak," Meredith said, tears filling her eyes. "For 6 years I protected myself and my son. I didn't want to become a burden to you." She drew a shaky breath. "And because they said they had someone inside your house. Someone who told them where I was staying. I didn't know who to trust." Jared stood motionless. "Someone inside his house. A traitor. Grant was gone. Harrison was gone. But someone else remained, hidden within his own walls." "Conrad," he called sharply. Conrad appeared within seconds, as if he had been waiting nearby for orders. "Sir, check every employee in the estate. Every single one. Now." Jared's eyes were ice. "There's still a traitor here, and I want to know who it is before sunrise." Conrad worked through the night, and by the time the sun rose, he had the answer. The traitor was a servant named David, hired at Thornton Manor 3 months earlier, just before Aiden appeared. His record had been flawless, too flawless, and that had been the first warning sign. When confronted, David confessed that Grant had paid him to monitor everything inside the estate and report regularly. He was the one who told Grant which hotel Meredith was staying in the night she was abducted. He was the one who passed along Jared's schedule so Grant could plan the attack. Jared stood across from the traitor in his study, gray eyes cold as ice. The old version of him would have handled David the way the underworld handled problems, quietly, permanently. But that was the old version. "Call the police," Jared told Conrad. "Turn him over with every piece of evidence we have. Trespassing, conspiracy to kidnap, whatever charges they can make stick. And make sure he never comes within a mile of my family again." David was led away, and with him the final shadow of the old Thornton darkness closed its chapter. 3 months later, everything had changed. Jared sold Thornton Manor, the estate that carried too many dark memories and too much pain. In its place, he bought a house by the sea, about an hour's drive from the city. Not large, just enough for 3 people, and the dog Aiden had begged to adopt. The house had a small garden, a wide porch overlooking the water, and a living room filled with sunlight each morning. Most important of all, it held laughter. Aiden's laughter as he chased the dog across the sand. Meredith's laughter when she experimented with a new cake recipe and failed spectacularly. Even Jared's laughter, something he had once believed himself incapable of. Jared still ran his business, but from a distance, and in an entirely new direction. No more smuggling, no more protection rackets, no more violence. Only legitimate enterprises now. Real estate, restaurants, hotels. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always smooth, but he was building something clean, something he could be proud to leave to his son. He spent most of his time with Aiden, teaching him to swim in the clear blue water, reading stories each night, now comfortable giving each character a different voice, building sandcastles that the tide inevitably washed away, learning how to be a father day by day, moment by moment, mistake by mistake, and correction by correction. Meredith opened a small bakery in town, a dream she had carried long before her life had been swallowed by running and fear. The shop was modest, only a few tables, but it always smelled of fresh bread and warm coffee. The townspeople adored her, never knowing she had once fled through 12 cities with a child in her womb. To them, she was simply Meredith, the woman with the gentle smile and the best pastries on the coast. One evening, after Aidan had fallen asleep and the house rested in quiet peace, Jared and Meredith sat on the beach watching the sunset. The sun sank slowly beneath the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and rose. Waves brushed the shore softly, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. "I'm not the man you loved 7 years ago," Jared said thoughtfully, his voice low. He was younger, more naive. He believed he could have everything without paying a price. Meredith turned to him, eyes reflecting the fading light. "You're right. You're not that man anymore." She smiled, the smile he had missed for 6 years without even knowing it. "You're better. You chose us over the Empire. You gave up power to keep your family. Not everyone can do that." Jared shook his head gently. "It wasn't a difficult choice the way you think. An empire means nothing if there's no one to share it with. I had everything once. Money, power, fear in other men's eyes. But every night I came home to an empty house. Every night I felt something missing that I couldn't name. Now I know what it was." Meredith unclasped the chain and placed the ring in Jared's palm. The metal was warm from her skin, a symbol of a love she had never let go. Jared looked down at the diamond glinting against his skin, his heart aching with the weight of 6 lost years. Inside lay the engagement ring he had given her 7 years earlier. The small diamond caught the last light of the sun, still beautiful. "Why?" he asked, his voice thick. "Why didn't you sell it when you needed the money so badly?" "Because it was the only proof we had ever been real," Meredith answered, tears sliding down her cheeks even as she smiled. "Proof that you loved me. That night, in my tiny apartment, with candlelight flickering around us, you knelt down and promised me a new life. There were nights I opened the box just to look at it, to remind myself I wasn't crazy, that the love had been real." Jared rose to his feet, then slowly knelt in the sand, just as he had 7 years ago. Only this time it wasn't in a cramped apartment but on an open beach, with the sunset behind him and the ocean as witness. "Meredith Ashford," he said steadily, though his eyes shone. "Last time I promised you a new life and failed. I couldn't keep that promise. I let my family steal everything we had." He lifted the ring, the diamond glinting in the fading light. "This time I won't promise perfection. I won't promise that everything will be easy. I only ask for the chance to prove myself every single day. To prove that I'm worthy of you, worthy of being Aidan's father, worthy of the love you kept for me for 6 long years." Meredith looked at him, tears bright in her eyes but her smile radiant. "Yes," she said, her voice clear as a bell over the sound of the waves. "Yes, Jared. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and this time he knew no one would ever take it away again. No more secrets, no more enemies waiting in the shadows, no more toxic family or dark past chasing them. Only the two of them on the shore, with the sea and the setting sun bearing witness to a love that had waited 7 years to be made whole. The sound of small footsteps racing across the sand made both Jared and Meredith turn. Aidan was running toward them, black hair whipping in the ocean breeze, little feet kicking up sprays of sand with every step. He stopped a few paces away, staring at his father kneeling before his mother with a puzzled expression. "What are you doing?" he asked, tilting his head. "Why is Mom crying?" Jared rose and lifted his son into his arms, settling the boy against his hip. He looked at Aidan with a tenderness he once believed himself incapable of showing. "Mom's happy, son, and so am I. Those are happy tears." Aidan glanced from his father to his mother, still trying to understand. Then his eyes fell on Meredith's hand, where the diamond ring shimmered in the fading light. "It's so pretty," he said softly. He looked up again, green eyes shining. "So we're a real family now, Dad? Like other families?" Jared felt his throat tighten. This 5-year-old boy had lived his entire life without a father. He had watched other families with quiet longing, wishing for what other children took for granted. "Forever, son," Jared said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're a real family. Forever." Aidan grinned and reached out to wrap his arms around Meredith's neck, pulling all 3 of them into a single embrace. They stood there on the beach, 3 silhouettes blending into one as the sun slowly slipped beneath the horizon. That weekend, Paige came to visit. She was the only member of the Thornton family welcomed into the new house. Meredith opened the door, and the two women embraced like old friends who had known each other for years. In the months since everything had unraveled, they had grown close, sharing stories no one else could truly understand. Paige sat on the porch, watching Aiden play with the dog on the sand below. She turned to Jared, her eyes bright. "I'm glad my brother finally found the light," she said. "I was afraid you'd live forever in the shadow of the Thornton name." Jared looked at his sister, the one who had stood against their father and brother to protect him, the one who had carried the secret of Meredith for 6 years with quiet guilt, the one who had helped save Meredith and Aiden the night the manor was attacked. "You're part of that light too, Paige," he said, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Don't ever forget that. Without you, I wouldn't have any of this." Paige smiled, the first smile he had seen on her face that wasn't shadowed by sorrow. As dusk settled, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and violet, Paige left, and the three of them remained on the beach. Aiden sat between his parents, holding his father's hand in one small fist and his mother's in the other. The dog lay at their feet, tail thumping softly in the sand. In the distance, their new home stood quietly. Not a towering estate like Thornton Manor, just a modest house by the sea with lights beginning to glow in the windows, but it was home. A place filled with Aiden's laughter every morning, a place that smelled of Meredith's baking each afternoon, a place where Jared returned each evening knowing someone was waiting. Jared looked at his family, the thing he once believed he would never have. He had been the most feared boss on the East Coast, a man the underworld bowed to. He had possessed power, wealth, the fear of others. Yet none of it had brought him even a fraction of the happiness he felt now. Now he was simply Jared, a father learning, still awkward with burnt breakfasts and fairy tales told in the wrong voices. A man learning to love again after 6 years of forgetting what love even meant. And that was the greatest title he had ever held. Not Thornton's heir, not the head of an empire, just Jared, Aiden's father, Meredith's beloved, a part of a family. "Dad," Aiden said, breaking the gentle silence, "what are we doing tomorrow?" Jared looked at Meredith, then down at his son, his gray eyes warmer than they had ever been. "Whatever you want. We have a whole lifetime ahead of us." Meredith rested her head on his shoulder, chestnut hair stirring in the ocean breeze. "A whole lifetime," she whispered, "and this time, no one will take it away." The last light of day settled over the three figures sitting in the sand, blending them into a single silhouette, a perfect portrait of what people call family. The most powerful crime boss on the East Coast had found something more valuable than any empire, a family to come home to. He had once lived in darkness, surrounded by betrayal from those who shared his blood, but one stormy night, a 5-year-old boy had knocked on his door and changed everything. Sometimes light comes from places we never expect. Sometimes it comes from the ones we thought were lost. And sometimes remembering is the very thing that saves us. This story reminds us that family is not always those who share our blood. Family is those who choose to stay, who choose to love, who choose to fight for us. Sometimes we must walk away from those called kin to find those truly worthy of our hearts. Power and wealth can buy many things, but they cannot buy happiness. They cannot buy a child's laughter or the warmth of the one you love. Jared gave up half an empire to keep his family, and it was the wisest decision of his life. Because in the end, when everything else falls away, the only thing that remains is love. If this story has touched your heart, please like and share it with those you love. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next heartfelt story. We would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Jared's decision? Would you give up an empire for your family? Leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. Every comment encourages us to continue bringing meaningful stories to you. Finally, we wish all of you watching good health, joy, and peace each day. Remember, no matter how difficult life becomes, there is always light waiting at the end of the tunnel. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.